So, Mr. Dingus, do you expect me to talk?
No, Mr. Bond. I expect you to talk about the James Bond 007 role-playing Her Majesty's Secret Service game from 1983.
Oh my god, I'm so excited to talk about this game.
Welcome to the Goblins and Growlers podcast, everybody. I'm Brandon at Way of Brandalore.
And I am Josh at Black Cloak DM on Twitter.
And we would like this episode to be reviewed as shaken, not stirred.
Hopefully, once you've heard everything we have to say about this James Bond RPG from the 70s, you will only feel stirred and not shaken, unlike the delicious martinis.
How are you doing this week, Josh?
Oh, I'm pretty good. Busy, but that's standard fare. How about you?
I'm doing fine. Probably about the same. I've been looking forward to this evening, though. But before we jump into our licenses to kill here, there's just a couple of news items we wanted to chat about. This stuff just rolled out maybe like the day or two before we recorded, and we know, it's probably been a couple weeks at this point, so it's technically kind of oldish news, but not everybody follows this stuff. But the first thing we wanted to touch base on is Wizards of the Coast, in their latest errata that's come out, are doing some rebooting and retconning of things.
Yeah, I think the one that excited me the most is to have the concept of all drow are evil is removed from their stat blocks and their character, like when you're trying to do a playable character race, it's removed from that as well. And it now says that the cult of Lolth is evil and that there are drow down there in the Underdark who are like, no, we have to stop them.
Yeah, and this is part and parcel of a lot of other stuff. Like, they eliminated from all, like, not just the drow, but other races too, like inborn alignments. So certain, dwarfs aren't always something. Elves aren't always something. It's more of a role-playing, personality-based thing as they continue to take little steps forward to minimize or eliminate insensitive portrayals and stereotyping that they've really been called to task on in the last year and a half. I think the first big one in that was the Vistani in Curse of Strahd, where they changed what had been a problematic portrayal since like 1983, finally in 2020 decided that wasn't acceptable anymore. You got to appreciate progress, I guess, but I've said before that they knew it was bad when they were doing it. They knew it was unacceptable, but they waited until people's voices got loud enough that they couldn't ignore it anymore, because they were happy to ignore it.
Well, and in spite of all of the changes they are currently making, they are still selling with just a little disclaimer at the front of it about like, oh, well, these were the times we were in. All of their, I believe they're called Oriental adventures, which is just super great, Just, oh my gosh.
Yeah. And that kind of leads into a second thing that I wanted to talk about, and that is Ernie Gygax's cluster of a company, that is being, called New TSR. How familiar are you with this whole affair?
I am very familiar with this whole affair. It's basically Ernie Gygax laid claim to the TSR copyright, managed to make enough of a stir that the people who previously had TSR were like, you know what? We're going to just go by something else because we really don't want to be affiliated with this garbage.
Yeah, that was the wildest thing when I read that. They were able to get the trademark, but then there was somebody else who was also operating under TSR, and apparently for a little bit they were trying to work together. But then Ernie Gygax, I guess it was earlier this year, it was probably about 6-7 months ago, said some things about how D&D is too woke these days, and it's just straying from the founding principles of his father, Gary Gygax, and everybody started tuning him out kind of at that point, except for the people he was speaking directly to in a not so subtle dog whistle.
Yeah. That whole situation, like a lot of his stances on things, a lot of his opinions, deeply, deeply problematic individual.
But after that, Ernie Gygax primer there, the the key thing going on now is his new TSR company sued Wizards of the Coast, and it was like on its face, it just looked like a frivolous lawsuit. But they were suing because they were trying to get the rights to like the TSR wordmark and design, Star Frontiers, Blackmore, the TSR Wizard logo, claiming that it had actually been abandoned and Wizards of the Coast hadn't been using it, even though they'd been publishing Star Frontiers like relatively recently. And that was even in the response from the Wizards of the Coast lawyer to the lawsuit. Just boil everything away. It's like, hey, we've actually been using this, so I don't know how you can say that like this is yours. And new TSR ended up withdrawing the lawsuit, but they maintained that they intend to refile, which, anytime somebody is sort of forced through embarrassment or lack of standing or anything to withdraw a lawsuit, they always claim that they're going to refile it as a way to save face. So I think it'll be really interesting this time next year to see if they actually did something about that.
There are three things that fascinate me about the whole lawsuit and then the refiling claim. The first is that in the court case, it came out that on their Facebook page, the new TSR was already talking about how Star Frontiers was going to be one of their next projects, even though they hadn't yet even begun to secure the copyright. So that was pretty funny. Yeah. And then the second thing was that the filing got withdrawn, I think it was 2 days after it was posted in the first place. And finally, the refile is going to be in Washington State.
The first one was filed in North Carolina.
Yeah, which I'm like, why did you file that in North Carolina if you were going to try to file it? Like, it's almost like they goofed up all the paperwork in the first place.
Just reading through it, and obligatory, I am not a lawyer. The new TSR LLC, they're authorized in Wisconsin and North Carolina, and they filed in North Carolina. I'm wondering if just because they thought that would be a more favorable legal environment for it.
Well, or possibly trying to be like, yeah, Wizards lawyers will never come down here to meet us in... Oh, no. Oh, they've already bought the tickets, you say.
They've got the money to meet you wherever they want to.
Wizards will meet you in another country on the other side of the planet if they need to.
They claimed that the lawsuit alleges, or not the lawsuit, I want to be precise since we're talking about legal actions. They have an Indiegogo crowdfunding campaign to raise money for these lawsuits.
Oh, God, yeah.
And they're alleging that they are being wrongfully bullied and that WotC is publicly libeling and slandering them. It's some real wild stuff here. It's like shoot for the moon legal strategy stuff. I don't know what they're trying to do here, other than make themselves look good to a ever smaller section of the role-playing game community.
Quite frankly, a legal action like this does not strike me as honest and forthright. It strikes me as the kind of thing that you do because news publications will be like, holy crap, you're doing what?
Yeah, because I'll be honest. Before I saw this the other day, I hadn't forgotten about the new TSR or Ernie Gygax, but it certainly was not at the forefront of my mind anymore. It's one of those things that I might see a passing reference to it and be like, oh yeah, that was a thing.
I mean, if I see a piece of trash in the alleyway and I can't clean it up, I'm only going to pay attention to it for so long,
Yeah. Oh, and to tie this back to what we were talking about before with Wizards of the Coast's legacy disclaimer, one of the things that new TSR was demanding as part of the legal action was the elimination of the legacy disclaimer. Presumably because it is denigrating some of the work that these guys are trying to lay their claim to.
It's insane. It's absolutely insane. I don't know why you would do something like this.
Yeah. Oh, let me clarify this. That was not part of the lawsuit. They said in addition to the lawsuit, they would seek to have Wizards of the Coast legacy disclaimer removed from the old Dungeons & Dragons publications. which is nonsense. And I got all of this information. I am a former journalist, and as such, I didn't do any original reporting on this. I got all my information on this and the other thing from belloflostsouls.net, which tends to be a pretty good resource for tabletop role-playing news.
Yeah, that's where I read the article, and then I want to say I saw a couple of like opinion piece comments on Twitter to that effect.
Yeah. All the opinion piece comments on Twitter are largely this. I would say 99% of them are largely the same, and they describe Ernie Gygax in an unflattering way.
Which I think is fair.
Yeah, but we'll put links to these stories in the show notes so you can see it for yourself. So having gotten that business out of the way, are you ready to take on some much more serious business of espionage and assassinations?
Global intrigue, people of interest, powerful people in powerful positions.
Yeah, so I can't remember how I stumbled on this, but I was just thinking about what bizarre licensed role-playing games were out there that maybe I didn't know anything about. And I was 1.5 when this was released, so that's why I didn't know about it. So I stumbled onto the Bond role-playing game, just poking around looking for something interesting that I hadn't seen before, so I could, learn about it. And it was released in 1983. I think it was published through like 1989. Yeah, 1989, 1987, something like that. But it was from Victory Games. There's the basic set for it, and then it has a whole bunch of expansions and adventures, essentially, that are based on Bond movies and stuff like that. It puts you... It's kind of weird. This is the big thing that I took away from it as I was reading about it that was just so weird, is it uses the plots from Bond movies, and I think it's explicitly using the movie plots rather than Ian Fleming's novel plots, because they're two different things. Like, if you watch Moonraker and read Moonraker, you're like, were entirely two different stories. Like, there was no commonality among any of that. But it will put you sort of in the storyline of one of the films, but then it changes something, so it's not 100% predictable, which I think is a really interesting way of handling a licensed property where some of the appeal, drawing people into playing it, is, oh, I remember this movie, I really enjoyed this. Because otherwise you're just kind of making a generic spy adventure, albeit with probably the most valuable spy IP there is or ever was.
I mean, I don't know. Austin Powers is pretty big.
Shagadelic. But like, for example, Goldfinger's trying to break into Fort Knox. In the Goldfinger adventure for the James Bond 007 RPG, it's like a gold mine rather than Fort Knox. So it changes it up a little bit. It makes it interesting. You can play as actual people from the movies. You can be Felix Lighter, you can be Bond, you can be Anya Amasova, who was Triple X from The Spy Who Loved Me. I actually love that movie and did not realize her full name until I read this and had to be like, who is that? And I looked it up. But you can also create your own original character. And there are like 3 ranks. You start out as a rookie and you can go up to agent, and then you can make your way up to 00 agent. And it's all very numerically complicated. And we'll get into that in just a little bit. And I'll post a picture of the character sheet in the show notes too, but it is very complex looking. And I've got some opinions about it that we'll get into. So how much of this did you have a chance to really like read about and learn about?
So I didn't get to spend any time looking at the books themselves, in part because I couldn't find a moderately reputable source to look at them from, and time's been kind of short. I did look at kind of everything surrounding the books, so I learned some interesting stuff. Like, if you look at the cover art for all of these modules, you'll notice that they kind of look like movie Bonds, but they don't look distinctly like any of the movie Bonds. And I feel like it's kind of funny to see that done that long ago, because I feel like they do the same thing nowadays with like the Spider-Man Insomniac game, where it's like, he's not really Andrew Garfield or Tobey Maguire or Tom Holland or any of those people. He's kind of distinct from them while sort of looking like all of them.
He's a melange.
A little bit, yeah. And so this is like a mulbange.
Ha 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 ha. An espionage. I thought that the generic Bond looked a lot like the George Lazenby Bond.
I'm inclined to agree, but he looks just slightly different. So it's almost like, you know, you take George Lazenby and you're like, can I copy your homework? And it's like, yeah, but make it look like you didn't copy it.
Yeah. It's Jorge Lazenby. Yeah, you know, I imagine a lot of that had to do with licensing issues, because you put Sean Connery's face in something, you got to pay Sean Connery money. You put Roger Moore's face in something, you got to pay Roger Moore money. However, I'm pretty confident there's line art of Roger Moore in this, and we can talk about that in a little bit. Well, I might as well just talk about it now. There's some nice line art in there of Bond being attacked by two guys, one of whom looks like Uncle Fester from the Addams Family, and the other of whom looks like Edgar Allan Poe. And they're attacking Bond with a bottle that they broke over a table, so it's like a bar fight. But it's very clearly Roger Moore. I'll put that picture in the show notes, too. And I don't know how they were able to get it that close to Roger Moore without paying him money.
I mean, I think they cheated it just enough.
Mm-hmm.
I think also part of the reason for doing it that way is that you then don't have it tied to a specific actor.
Mm-hmm.
So when you are making modules that span generations of different Bonds, you don't have to be like, oh, well, this is a different era of Bond that we are representing here.
I would love it if it was like one of the Batman Arkham games, where you could take different eras of Batman and put them in there, where you could have like Adam West Batman in Arkham City or something like that. You could have Daniel Craig fighting Goldfinger or something.
Oh my god, that would be amazing.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, it's a tabletop RPG. You can do that. Bond is a playable character. This is a dream you could be living.
It's just hilarious to me that they give, like, obviously you could create Bond if you wanted to. You could do almost anything and just say, this is Bond. But just the idea of having Bond available as a pre-generated character, it's like, who are you going to play? I'm going to be James Bond because he's the best.
I think my favorite part of that is picturing someone sitting down and being like, I was going to play Bond. And it's like, what? Can't you do something a little bit less like vanilla than just playing Bond? Like, it's the Bond TTRPG. Yeah. You could be any 00 agent.
Or you could play into the Bondiverse, and everybody could be playing a different James Bond and just tweak the stats accordingly. So you could have Daniel Craig teaming up with Pierce Brosnan, teaming up with Timothy Dalton, teaming up with Roger Moore.
I'm not going to lie. All of those Bonds combined would be a pretty effective team. Though Are
they like Captain Planet? They merge together to form like an Ultra Bond? They're very tightly bonded. It's an unbreakable bond.
Yeah. It's such a good Bond. Now, more what I was thinking was like, I'm picturing all of the different people, like all of the different versions of James Bond that have existed, trying to work together and just absolutely driving each other bananas.
It would be you can watch that. It's called Any Doctor Who crossover special. Those exist. And some of them even actually have Timothy Dalton in them.
I have seen a couple of the Doctor Who crossover specials, and they were... I will leave it at something else. They were something else.
That's a good way to put it. That's a very kind and charitable way to put it. For that storied and revered science fiction franchise. Talking a little bit more about the licensing issues on this is Bond aficionados are probably pretty familiar with this, but the problem with being able to use Spectre, you know, the criminal organization against whom Bond fights, under the direction of Blofeld, it was tied up. I think it was because of where the idea came from. It was tied up for a long time, and that's why they had to wait to make the Daniel Craig Spectre movie until when they made it, because I think they wanted to make that earlier, but the rights were still in question. So this is back in 1983. Rights most definitely in question at this point. So they had to come up with an alternative to Spectre, and they called it Tarot, Taro. And they have a little allusion to what's going on. There's like a little paragraph where they introduce Tarot, and it's like, due to some intellectual property issues, we can't use the actual organization that Bond fights against, but we hope you get what we're saying, basically. And here's Tarot.
Oh my god. I knew that there was licensing issues with Spectre that made them go Tarot, which I thought was pretty funny in of itself. I also knew, and I didn't realize this, but Blofeld is also specifically licensed.
Mm-hmm.
And so they couldn't use, even like changing the name of the organization, they couldn't use Blofeld either.
Mm-hmm.
Which I didn't know you could just, I mean, it makes sense thinking about it. But in the moment, I was like, wait, you can just license some dude?
Yeah.
And then I was like, well, he's the big villain. I guess that makes sense. It's not like you're licensing like henchman number 24, like, you can't have a blonde guy in a yellow jumpsuit wearing a white construction hat.
Yeah.
We licensed that.
Like, ownership and usage rights are really weird with writing. Like, my favorite example of this is from Star Trek, as most of the references I make are. But the character of Tom Paris in Voyager was actually originally meant to be Nicholas Locarno from the episode of Star Trek The Next Generation, The First Duty, where the same actor played the same kind of character, like a rogue ne'er-do-well who gets kind of cashiered from the service. And the original plan was to bring Locarno back for Voyager, but they realized that the writer of that TNG episode wasn't like a staff writer, it was a freelancer. So every time, if Nick Locarno was on Voyager that he appeared, they would have to pay that writer. So they're like, screw you guys, I'm going home. And they put a piece of masking tape over the name Nick Locarno and got a Sharpie out and wrote Tom Paris.
Find, replace all.
I think there's actually in one episode of Voyager a picture of Paris, like when he was in the academy or something, and it's actually a still from that episode of Next Generation of Nick Locarno. But yeah, that's kind of
amazing.
That stuff could get really weird. So I'm not at all surprised that there was some, especially with the way the Bond rights have been negotiated and sold and everything over the last, at this point, I guess, probably 30 or 40 years back in the 80s, that there's something hung up there somewhere, making it not like super clean to be able to do something like that.
No, and it makes sense. Like, I imagine Ian Fleming, when he was still around, was fairly careful about who got the rights to the largest book series he had ever written.
Yeah.
I would be. I don't blame him.
Yeah. So talking a little bit about the mechanics of the game, it operates on a percentile system. I think the only two dice that the game uses are D10s and D6s, if I remember right. But,
wow.
But essentially, you give yourself, a percentage of ability in something, and then you have to roll for it. And the further away you are from the number, the more successful or the more failure-tastic you are. And it's really interesting because you start reading about the mechanics and how they do the storytelling and chase scenes and stuff like that. And you start to realize that it's a very sort of cinematic storytelling feel, almost like it's trying to reach for something kind of like more modern, like Fate. It very much feels like how Fate would want to tell us a spy story. And it's just interesting how almost like it was before its time and really looking forward to what role-playing games could be, because it wasn't trying to be Dungeons & Dragons. It was trying to be something different. And it really does its best in that sort of 1980s way of capturing the excitement of a car chase or a helicopter chase. I'm not going to really get into all the chase rules and everything like that, because this is a 162-page source book, and it is the height of 80s source books, where it's like 2 columns, pretty much text, and that's it. There's some tables in it and everything. When you're doing your percentile rolls and stuff, you have to multiply your percentage number to get your result. And all the sheets, I think it's on all the character sheets, have a multiplication table, like a literal matrix that you can use to multiply numbers really quick, because I guess they didn't trust people to know how to do it in their heads back then.
Well, and it's not like everybody had a calculator in their pocket at all times.
Yeah.
So
Remember how popular the calculator watch was back then? Well, you can't remember
yeah,
because you weren't there. But I was, and I remember how popular the calculator watch was.
I am aware of how popular the calculator watch was. That sort of information transcends time.
Uh-huh.
I was gonna say, regarding like degrees of success in cinematic storytelling, it almost makes you wonder if the people who came up with systems like Genesis or Fate, how much they were inspired by systems like this that they had already seen in play and been like, oh, you know what? Like, what if we did that, but we changed this and we did this other thing? Like, I realize people can come up with ideas completely independent of reading something like this, but so often we are inspired by the things around us and the things that we experience ourselves. I wouldn't be surprised at all to find that some of the people behind those systems were like, oh my god, I love the James Bond RPG.
Yeah. No, if this is like if this is like the Mark 1 Iron Man armor, then something like Fate would probably be like the Mark 42 or something. Just like another iteration on it that refines it and makes it better. Because there's still a lot of math and a lot of dice and a lot of parsing and stuff like that in this, but at the same time, there's freedom for players and the GM to narratively dictate things in a cinematic fashion. And I think Fate just takes it a few steps further, removing a lot of the distractions of the math, simplifying the dice, simplifying the dice to something with a plus, a minus, or a blank, and then roll those and figure it out. And just makes it a bit more of an elegant system. But this is definitely the building blocks upon which something like that was based. It's just it's just very weird how forward-thinking this feels with the benefit of being able to look back on it.
Oh, absolutely. And I suspect that the creators of it were like, yeah, let's do something different. Let's do something weird. Let's get creative with it, because we're not doing D&D. That's not our thing.
Mm-hmm. Another just couple of things that I want to just tick off that I really liked is they really want you to make flawed characters. This is certainly not unique to the Bond game, but it's got a character creation pool with points, and you can give yourself more points by taking on weaknesses. Again, very common thing, but I really like how they pushed it in this one. So you're not creating just a spy Superman. You can create a spy that's got weird phobias, addicted to gambling or drugs or alcohol, is afraid of ghosts, is a sadist, all kinds of different things. There's a big list in the book, but surely you could come up with anything you wanted and work with your GM to help assign a numerical value to that.
God, I just love the idea of the James Bond-esque 00 agent arrives at the secret lair, and the supervillain is like, we've been expecting you, Mr. Bond. And he's like, oh yeah? I'll be up there in a minute to show you a thing or two. And the villain's like, perhaps you will, but only if you can navigate my gauntlet of haunted dolls.
Yes, we know Bond is agoraphobic. I will agree to meet him, but only in the middle of the vast Arizona desert.
How does this open sky make you feel, Mr. Bond? I love the concept of that so much. That'd be so much fun to play.
Mm-hmm. You could run just a whole game of flawed characters. And, I'm not saying people who have a phobia is a flaw. That's, there's nothing wrong with that. It's just playing against archetype for this kind of character.
Yeah. Well, having characters that have weaknesses, having characters that aren't good at everything, I think it's more fun to play a game like that. Mm-hmm. Let's be real.
A Bond who's a terrible marksman. The more I think about this, the more I think the only real way to play this game would be to play everybody as James Bond, but play it as the Bond multiverse, where everybody's a Bond where something different happened in their life, or this one's good at this. This Bond is actually an accountant.
This Bond has narcolepsy.
This Bond is from a dimension so different that he actually breathes water.
Ooh.
Now we're getting into the Citadel of Bonds and Rick and Morty and James Bond.
The name's Pond. James Pond.
Very good. You get a slow clap from me on that one. Other things I like about this is it's got like 2 or 3 pages on seduction, and the game encourages NPC seduction. You get appearance and fame rankings for a lot of that stuff. So this is the perfect game for players who love to play bards. Just go all over the place, seducing everybody. You have a fame ranking where if you get too famous and well known, it makes it harder to do your job as a spy. I think that's really cool. It's got several pages of rules and flavor for gambling. There are dice-oriented rules for poker. I think there's rules for blackjack as well, and also rules for cheating. Which rules for cheating sounds like a really good band name, I think. But then it's got lots and lots of flavor text for gambling destinations throughout the world. London, continental Europe, Monte Carlo, Las Vegas, the Caribbean. In the Las Vegas section, it says something like the refined gamblers of England and France may find an unfamiliar setting in Las Vegas with boisterous Americans loudly screaming and hollering.
I've only been in Vegas the once, but that was my experience.
Mm-hmm. And then it's got several pages on torture mechanics, which I didn't really read too closely, but it sounds like in addition to physical damage, if your spy gets captured and tortured, they also have a table on kind of the psychological effects that could have on them and how that might affect play later. So that actually sounds like a really solid mechanic for encouraging role play.
Yeah, that could be interesting to explore. I mean, obviously, you and your players better trust each other a whole hell of a lot.
Yeah,
holy smokes, you're gonna need to have some veils and boundaries on that one for sure.
Yeah. That was part of the reason that I didn't really read that one too closely, because if I were playing the game, I really wouldn't be worrying about that. I'm long past that sort of edgelordy phase of my life where I want to play gritty, serious games all the time. There's a time and a place for it, and there's nothing wrong with liking that kind of thing. I'm just sort of past it now.
No, that's fair.
Yeah. But the game, it just does a superb job reading through the book of capturing that whole spirit and experience of a Bond adventure in a role-playing game form. It tries too hard in some aspects, like the chase mechanic, which, again, I'm not going to get into, but you could read it for yourself, involves a little too much dice, I think. I think that could be handled a lot better if they lean more on the narrative. It would flow a lot better. It tries to be too many things. It tries to be a suave, cinematic action adventure, but at the same time, it's GURPS with James Bond. There's just a lot of dice, a lot of numbers. There's so many stat blocks for vehicles, for gadgets, for enemies and everything. And there's nothing wrong with that, but there's just so much detail, I guess, is what I'm getting at. And I guess that's sort of like a criticism with a lowercase c. There's nothing wrong with that, but GURPS has an image. GURPS has a reputation and a player base of being what it is. Very, very detailed for people who love the very, very detailed. And if you love that kind of level of detail in a spy game, 100% the 007 role-playing game is for you. You will love it. It's specialized GURPS, essentially. So it's SERPs, Specialized Universal Role-Playing System. But, obviously I haven't had a chance to actually sit and play it. My interpretation of this is just from reading the rules and knowing how games run and everything like that. I think I would enjoy it if I played it. I probably wouldn't pick it up and make it sort of a regular thing that I do, but it would be really fun to do this, I think, for a one-shot adventure or something.
Oh yeah, I could absolutely see that. It could make for a very entertaining time without getting fully committed to the rule set and creating a whole campaign in that universe.
Mm-hmm.
Run one scenario. Maybe that takes a few sessions to complete.
Yeah. You had told me before we started recording, you were like, hey, are you aware of some of the other games that Victory Games has put out? And you were about to tell me, and you're like, no. We got to save this for the podcast.
Yes. So pulling up Victory Games, because the name seemed familiar to me, because, I don't know, I guess it's generic enough that I was like, I'm pretty sure I've heard of this company before. I looked through their catalog, and I was like, actually, this is not familiar, like, at all. So I guess I was wrong. I must have been thinking of someone else. But I did find some really fascinating and excellent gems in their catalog, which mostly, by the way, is a lot of war games. Like, good lord, they have so many war games.
That doesn't surprise me at all.
They have games about Vietnam. They have games about the Korean War. They've got so many games where it's like, oh, we're going to do this specific era of combat in a theater of war. And it's like, cool. I'm assuming there was a big market for that at the time y'all were producing it. Totally groovy. Not really my shtick.
Oh yeah, the war games, like the tabletop wargaming market used to be huge. Like there was so much more than just like Warhammer, which feels like is, if you're going to get into tabletop wargaming nowadays, you're going to be playing Warhammer. But there was so much of it. I mean, TSR grew out of wargaming. So that doesn't surprise me. And it doesn't surprise me that this company of all companies focused on that, given some of my criticisms for the way some of the mechanics work in this Bond game, with all the tables and dice and everything like that. It does feel very wargamey. You know, now that you give me that context for it, it makes a lot more sense. It's almost like if you mashed up Fate in a war game.
I mean, that makes sense to me.
Yeah.
Like, so those I would say are their very, what I would call their boring other options. They have a few things in here which I was like, I'm sorry, go on. They have a game called Look at the Schmuck on That Camel.
I don't like where this is going already.
It is apparently, I haven't done a whole lot of research on this because I literally saw it on the Board Game Geek website and I was like, I'm sorry, what? It is a game of over 100 Yiddishisms with 400 plus definitions, give or take a little, where participants are asked to logically determine whether a Yiddish word is defined correctly.
What?
Right?
That is not what I was expecting at all when you started talking. That's so bizarre.
Oh my god. So here's the thing, Brandon. It gets weirder.
Okay, hit me.
They have a Playboy bunny game.
It does get weirder.
Called Playboy, the Game of Elegant Lifestyles.
Oh my god.
It is the Victory Games take on the Parker Brothers classic game Careers.
Oh god.
Players move around a board aspiring to achieve the targets they set themselves at the beginning of the game.
No.
The big difference is the players do not want to accumulate fame and happiness. Rather, they must buy the best cars, hook up with the prettiest women, and in general, obtain the best possessions that they can.
This is awful. It's the game of shallow life.
Yeah, it really, really is. I was like, why would you... at first, I was like, why would you have a game about Playboy? And then I was like, oh, they mean like international Playboy, like the
generic Playboy.
Generic Playboy term. But the thing is, they licensed the Playboy bunny image for this game.
Well, of course they did, because that's a way to sell more.
Right. Now, in that vein, they do have two games, one called Sex Quest and the other called Sexual Q&A, neither of which I am brave enough to open, but for those of you who are, please go explore. And then I think, where is it? Here it is. The final one I wanted to mention, because it's easily the one that is the most, like, I was like, wait, I'm sorry, you made a game out of that? The Game of Good Cooking.
What?
Be the first to prepare a week's meals in this amusing and delectable game. Stop at the bank to get your shopping money. Stroll through the supermarket and select menus. Visit the shopping mall to buy a microwave oven or food processor to speed meal preparation. When you've assembled a complete meal, main course, side dish, and appetizer or dessert, Hurry to the kitchen. There's no time to lose. The other players are racing around the board to complete their meals too.
I mean, okay.
Tell me you don't want to play that right now.
I mean, I guess if I had it in front of me, I would want to play it. I'm not going to expend a lot of effort to find a copy of that anywhere.
I have no idea.
At first, I thought you were talking about like a role-playing game. I was like, that doesn't sound fun at all. And then it slowly dawned on me that it was a board game.
Yeah, no, I think most of these that I've talked about are all board games. But just like they were out there creating these things in like the late 70s, early 80s, which I'm like, get it. Like, I hope y'all did reasonably well for yourselves outside of the wargaming market, because some of these things are so bananas. It just brings me so much joy.
I wonder how they ended up getting the job to put the Bond game together.
Well, that's, as I understand it, one of their earlier pieces of work.
Really? I would think that's something that you need a body of work to show so you can actually like land that contract.
Well, the thing is, they've got games as recently as 92.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, let me double check here.
I mean, that's only 9 years after this came out, so that doesn't sound crazy.
The oldest I'm seeing of their games is 83.
So yeah. I mean, it might have been a thing where they approached the Fleming estate or whoever happened to have the rights at the time and be like, hey, I think we could all make some money on this.
It's also possible that they were like just starting to make a name for themselves with something a little more indie and doesn't show up in their Board Game Geek listing specifically because it was something that they published well before they had like trademarks and copyrights and things like that in place.
Yeah. That's so interesting. That's really interesting.
I love stuff like this where it's like, you made a board game out of what?
I've got to look at some of those. That all sounds crazy. I'm very interested.
It's amazing. I am about it.
Tying it back to the topic for just a second. What's your favorite Bond movie, Josh?
I had to think about this a lot. I think just for what it is, my favorite Bond movie is probably GoldenEye, which I know is a little controversial for a few folks because it doesn't lean fully into the corny side of Bond, where it's like ridiculous over the top villains with ridiculous over the top plans, but it's pretty close, while simultaneously not leaning all the way into the current Bond, which is a lot more like, the gritty realism of racing cars through the European countryside.
Parkouring across buildings and through walls.
Yeah, I mean, I love Daniel Craig is my favorite Bond just from not necessarily how Bond does things, but from how Daniel Craig portrays him doing things, I guess.
How so?
Like, the scenes where Daniel Craig is like interacting with a villain or interacting with, a person of interest for him or someone like that, like, I love so much the energy that he brings to those scenes where it's kind of like, yeah, I mean, I am here right now. Like, we may as well do this. Let's do this. Okay, yeah, absolutely. Like, there's so often where he's like, why do you have a giant ice sculpture out in the middle of the Antarctic? Why is this a hotel for you? Why any of this? None of it makes sense.
He's the Dr. McCoy of Bond movies.
Yeah, and I love that. And I think that's part of, between that and the like, it's gritty realism action scenes with parkour, like, I think that's why so many people are like, Daniel Craig is not my favorite Bond. But I love specifically the interactions he has with folks. But GoldenEye, I think, is that like beautiful blend of both worlds, where it's like, someone's going to incinerate whole countries with a giant laser from space. And how is Bond going to stop them? With clicker pen bombs. Like,
who's your favorite Bond villain?
I think my favorite Bond villain is Dr. No, because he was the one that had the huge fluffy white cat, right?
I believe so. It was either him or Blofeld.
And the scar on the eye. Was that Blofeld? Oh, no.
No, Blofeld had the scar on the eye. You're thinking of Blofeld.
I am thinking of Blofeld. Okay, Blofeld then.
Yeah.
Just like
Change my answer.
Sorry. Well, it's difficult. I haven't watched Bond films in quite some time.
Mm-hmm.
In part because I was at the time trying to determine how I felt about them as I became a more socially and publicly aware person of some of the more problematic aspects of James Bond films.
Yeah, you could probably say that Dr. No is a problematic aspect of James Bond films.
Yeah. No, I was trying to recall the name of the gentleman with the eye scar and the big fluffy white cat, and if that's Blofeld, then that's who I got.
Yeah, that's Blofeld, because that was the basis for Dr. Evil and Dr. Claw from Inspector Gadget. So yes, Blofeld. Ernst Stavro Blofeld.
Yeah, he is a beautiful caricature of evil. And the fact that so many things have been like, oh yeah, that's going to be our archetype. Like, we're going to use that character as the base platform for what we're building. I think gives credit to what an excellent character he is.
I like Donald Pleasance as Blofeld, because Blofeld's been played by like half a dozen people. But Donald Pleasance is my favorite Blofeld actor.
I need to watch more James Bonds again, because I've seen most of them and I own the entire collection in a huge box set. So maybe you and I need to do a James Bond night or something.
Yeah, I'll tell you my favorite is hands down The Spy Who Loved Me. It is my absolute favorite. It's also my favorite Bond. Roger Moore is my favorite Bond, which is not a popular answer, because most people, if they're going for like a, pre-Brosnan Bond, are going to Sean Connery. Sean Connery's got a lot of problems. A lot of problems with Sean Connery. Roger Moore has some too. But as James Bond, he was my favorite because he was able to portray the seriousness and maturity of the character, especially his naval background. And this movie, The Spy Who Loved Me, is a really good example of that, because he has to slip into his sort of Commander Bond role in certain points. But he had that effortless charm that came across as more genuine and less condescending than Connery's Bond in a similar situation. And also, this is kind of when Bond started sort of going off the rails in terms of the caricatures of the gadgets and things like that. Spy Who Loved Me probably has one of the best Bond gadget / vehicles, and it's the Lotus Esprit that turns into a submarine, which is just fantastic. I love that. But it's got a guy stealing nuclear subs, trying to start Armageddon by having each of them fire nuclear missiles, one at Moscow, one at New York. It's got Bond teaming up with a KGB agent who, of course, he starts a relationship with. It has M and the head of the KGB sort of becoming halfway buddies throughout the whole thing. There's an undersea lair with a megalomaniacal villain. It's got all the classic elements of just an off-the-rails spy movie. It's fantastic. It's absolutely fantastic. I love it so much. It was one of the ones that I grew up... I think this is part of the reason that I enjoy it. When I was growing up in the mid-'80s, this came out in 1977, so it was on television by then. Same with Moonraker. That came out in 1979. It was on television. I was watching that. Man with the Golden Gun. Christopher Lee, Scaramanga. I was watching that. So I think that's why these Roger Moore movies really resonate with me, because they're the ones I grew up watching, like Live and Let Die. I remember watching that one time. It was on over-the-air television while I was camping with family, and we had my grandfather's motorhome, and he had a TV in it, and he had an aerial. So I remember we watched it then, and seeing the guy blow up at the end because Bond shot him full of the compressed air or whatever. That's an image that has stuck with me for probably 35 years at this point. But my favorite Bond villain, it's sort of a tie for me, because I love Jaws, because he has the best gimmick. He shows up twice. He has a redemption arc. So so you actually start rooting for Jaws at one point. But also Oddjob, because he has that awesome hat And if you're playing the GoldenEye N64 game, there's always the no odd job rule. Because nobody wants to be playing a game with somebody else playing odd job.
I mean, I think that's fair. When everyone else are playing the same size targets and someone is a target 2/3 the size of everyone else who moves at the same speed.
Yeah, but I just love that hat. I love that hat.
Oh, the hat is magical, don't get me wrong.
Did you ever watch James Bond Jr., the animated series from the 90s?
I did not. I was aware of its existence, but it was...
Yeah, that was before your time.
Well, not even that. It was... That and Young Indiana Jones were things that just did not appeal to me as an individual.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I was like, I would rather watch the franchises these are based on.
James Bond Jr. came on at 7 o'clock in the morning during the week when I was getting ready for school, because I was in, I want to say, 2nd grade or something when this was on. So I would watch it in the morning. I can't remember hardly a single thing about it, except for the theme song, which if you've never heard the theme song, it's a banger of a kid's cartoon theme with echoes of the James Bond theme. I'm going to put a link to the theme video in the show notes, just because if you've never seen it or heard it, it's absolutely worth it.
I'm going to need to follow that link, because even if I have, it's been so long that it's not in my mind at all.
Oh my God. Once you get it in your head, it's never going to leave. It's a huge earworm. So, talking about the Bond RPG one last time. So, where can you get it? Well, therein lies the rub. You can either get lucky and get a relatively inexpensive copy on eBay, because, of course, it's long out of print. It's almost as old as I am. So, it's very much out of print. You look hard enough for anything on the internet, you'll be able to find it. But I saw, and I'll put some of these in the notes too, I saw a couple of eBay listings for like complete sets of the basic game and all the adventures that were written for it. And, for what it was a pretty reasonable price for an out of print, essentially collector's item at this point. So that's good. There are a couple other options too, if you don't want to do that. Tabletop Simulator has a complete James Bond 007 RPG on there. It looks very complicated, but it looks like it has all the materials and everything. Cannot vouch for, the rights usage situation on here, but I'm looking at it right now. It's on Steam. It hasn't been taken down from Steam. It was posted in 2018. So who knows? But it's there.
I mean, it does kind of make you wonder, are they really going, is Victory Games out there watching their copyrights this closely?
I would be less worried about Victory Games and more about the Ian Fleming estate.
That's fair. Or MGM.
Yeah. But anyways, it's there. And then, if you want to be super careful, there's also a clone of the James Bond RPG called Classified by Expeditious Retreat Press. And you can actually get that on DriveThruRPG for like $10 in PDF form.
I feel like that's the route that I would send people myself.
Yeah.
If I had to pick one.
Yeah. Just get that piece of masking tape, put it on the cover, and write Bond on it. And you're good to go. You're 100% good to go. If you're looking for some 1980s spy action that's trying to be Fate before there was Fate, Classified is the way you want to go, DriveThruRPG. And we'll put a link to that in the show notes as well.
The title of the core rulebook is something silly and way more complex than it needs to be.
What, for
and
Classified?
Now I don't remember what it is. No, for the James Bond game.
Oh, it's enter the Victory Games world of James Bond 007, role-playing in Her Majesty's Secret Service, the complete basic game, including an introductory adventure.
Role-playing in Her Majesty's Secret Service, I think, is the actual official title of the source book. And I was like, how are you gonna put that on a magazine order catalog? It's so long.
It was a more innocent time in the 80s. But anyway, I didn't expect you to talk. I didn't expect you to dive, but I did expect you to have a good time. Did you enjoy talking about the James Bond RPG, Josh?
Oh, absolutely. And all of the many, many wonderful, weird things around it.
All right. Well, we'll be back next time, folks, with a whole different thing to talk about. So until then, thanks for tuning into the Goblins and Growlers podcast. Please support us with subscriptions, telling a friend, There's also a Patreon floating around out there, patreon.com/goblinsgrowlers. Join the Discord, bit.ly/goblin discord. I am Brandon at Way of Brandalore on Twitter.
And I am Josh at BlackCloakDM on Twitter.
And we'll see you next time.
Bye, y'all.